Welcome back. Drink your drinks, whatever. The next up is my co-captain here on the stage, Toby Sullivan. I'll let him tell about himself. I know he's fished the Bering Sea. He's got lots and lots of water under his keel, so give a good hand for Toby Sullivan.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out, folks. It's good to see more people every year at this event. It's become quite amazing. Me and Dave have been doing it quite a while, and in the late 90s, I think we had 12 readers and about 10 audience members, I think, something like that. And then the ratio has slowly gotten a little bit better there, so thanks for coming out. So, as Dave mentioned, I have fished for a long time. I'm still a commercial salmon fisherman in Kodiak. I've fished there since 1975. I was a Bering Sea crab fisherman for a long time, and now I just fish salmon in the summer. So this piece I'm going to read here is actually from a while back. It's when I first was in Alaska, and everything was brand new and very big. I came from New England right after high school to Kodiak, and I just remember, I grew up in Connecticut, which is smaller than Kodiak Island, and the bigness of the place was my main impression. It was just big and a little overwhelming, but I was kind of into it, and people like Dave were there to kind of help me along, get me through, and I stayed, and it has worked for me. So anyway, I'm just going to, without too much more introduction, I'm just going to read this piece, and I think it's self-explanatory. It's called Kodiak, 1975. Walking into Solly's now, 20 years later, I see the thing it has become. A saloon with TV screens bolted to the brick walls and dining in the back. Daylight crashes in through huge new windows, and a smooth, empty gleam reflects off all the woodwork and brass and green vinyl seating. It is not the way I remember it. The room has an almost virtual ambience, a cloned public environment now that repeats a kind of architectural genetic sequence seen everywhere in America. It is the look of airport pubs and mall restaurants and health club juice bars, anonymous places in a public culture gone as smooth and featureless as glass. There is a frightening sameness in the manufactured naturalness of the green marble bar, the blonde rails, brass fittings, the smoke-eater ducts up against a tongue-and-groove ceiling. All of these are pieces from a series of generic punch-outs ordered out of a decor supply catalog from somewhere far removed from Kodiak and assembled by a design work group in Seattle. And all of it resonates with a mass cultural frenzy and urban subtext, as if this room too was surrounded by a landscape of large rectangular buildings and freeways and mountains far enough off to be soft and blue and safe. And none of it feels like the place it used to be. When I think of it, or when I hear the name spoken by someone who knew the place in the time I am thinking of, I see the dark room, windowless and almost lightless on the sunniest days, the only illumination coming from the fish tank set in the back wall and a few tiny space lights recessed up in an invisible ceiling over the bar itself. At night, Solly's wasn't so bad, but coming in there from daylight could be an altering experience, and you'd see people standing there stunned at the door as the door closed behind them, staring blindly toward the clink of bottles and the murmur of conversation. They'd wait there by the door while their retinas geared down enough to walk in without hitting the cocktail tables around the dance floor or the fishermen sitting at them, still drinking or just starting at noon. The joke then was that it was deliberately dark to hide the cockroaches, but if we had trouble seeing our food too whenever we bothered to eat there, we really all felt more comfortable that way, slouching in the gloom. It was a place for drinking more than eating, for talking and listening more than seeing, for trying to explain to each other in a warm, safe place the lives we were living outside that space, in the wind, at sea, in the natural darkness of winter crab fishing. But really, there were no explanations, only stories. A guy would stand in front of you with a sweating bottle of Heineken in his hand, telling you about the ptarmigan that came fluttering out of the crab lights at 2 a.m. Dude, blowing 40 northeast and the compass rose off Chiricahua, for Christ's sakes, and you and me both know that bird cannot legally fly more than 50 straight feet on dry land. and you'd stand there leaning close to hear him above the band and 100 other conversations, trying to take that in, both of you dripping melting snow off the bills of your hats onto each other's chests, both of you wondering what that meant, because that was the night the Cloverleaf went down, and those guys floated around for 2 days in their survival suits without a life raft, and only one of them made it, with one of his friends still tied to him with a piece of crab line. In January 1975, during a tanner crab strike, a boat named the Martin came in with 50,000 pounds of tanner crab, thinking they could sit on it for a few more days while they figured out how long the strike would last. Someone had shot out the radar scanner on the Mariner a few days before for scabbing, but these guys were full of their own selves, as self-consciously bulletproof as maybe we all were then or thought we were, hoping for it all to turn out okay, hoping the strike would end in the morning, or if it didn't, that no one would care enough to do anything about it. It was snowing hard outside, and whenever the door swung open, big wet flakes would blow in and melt all over the dance floor and on the people dancing. But no one was watching the snow coming in, or the wind that was doing it, or the muddy puddle they were dancing in. We were all looking at these guys, standing at the bar in a little knot, their backs to the crowd, drinking hard, and we wondered if they really had the balls to sit in town with that crab for however long it took. But something must have happened at some point, because around 3 a.m, the owner came down, the owner of the boat, a big guy who owned a laundromat, and besides the boat, and he told the crew to head out of town and either dump the crab or hide out somewhere until the strike was over. They left the bar as drunk as the rest of us, and they went down to the cannery, untied the boat, and took off to go around Spruce Cape. When we all left an hour later, it was still blowing hard northeast and snowing. In the morning, Mission Road was covered over in snow, and it was still breezy, but you didn't have to lean into it like the night before. It had come down a lot. Across the road in front of the beachcombers, the wind had cleared the snow off a little and made it easier to walk. And looking down the beach from that side of the road, I didn't realize at first what all the broken pieces of wood meant. There were scraps the length of the beach, lying just below the tide line in the snow, and some still in the water, eddying in the surge left over from the storm. A big pile lay down at the end where the point jutted out, mostly broken planks with twisted off ends and bent nails sticking out, painted white on one side. In among the pieces of lumber were other things, a kitchen drawer, a mattress, some clothes, pieces of rain gear. They made it as far as that rock that has a flashing red light on it now, number 4 buoy off Spruce Cape Road, where the Coast Guard property line is. The wind was full of snow. And even if they had been leaving in daylight, they wouldn't have been able to see past the bow of the boat. The radar screen was gummed up green with electrical clutter, smothered in a soft frenzy of charged flakes as soon as they cleared the channel, but they kept on heading out, nose into the wind. They were running blind, drunk, and scared, and when a wave lifted them up and dropped them on the rock and broke the keel, it was both the surprise of their lives and totally expected, the logical conclusion in a string of bad choices running back to pulling that first crab pot a week before. All 4 of them were in the wheelhouse when they hit, and 3 of them got out of the boat as the boat was swept off the rock and rolled on its side and then upside down. They swam and crawled and were swept back along the hull to the shafts where they clung, screaming in pain at the cold, cold water, arguing about the chances of making it to the beach, feeling the cold taking their lives. 2 of them decided to try before they were too cold to try. One more choice and a night of shitty choices. But they knew it was only a couple hundred yards, and between squalls, they could see the kitchen lights and the houses on the road. One of the swimmers changed his mind a few yards out and turned back for the sure thing of the overturned hull, to his friend still hanging on there, to the chance that they could hang on till daylight. But the skipper, 24 years old, kept swimming for the beach. In those conditions, with the wind gusting to 60 and tearing the tops off 20-foot waves, in total darkness except for those lights along the road, measurable distance was only part of the equation, and none of us who heard about it later could imagine even trying to swim across to those cliffs, let alone making it. But in the only piece of good luck all night, at the last possible moment when good luck would have done any good, a cop was out patrolling and he thought he saw something, got out of his car, and he shone his flashlight down the cliff. The skipper had made it ashore and crawled halfway up to a ledge before seizing up in the blowing snow. The next day, somebody went up to see him in the hospital and came back saying the guy had been brought in with, this is what we were told, the lowest recorded body temperature of anybody who had ever lived. But that seemed the least surprising part of the whole story. It did not seem possible to us that anyone could be so furiously alive as to survive that night. And though we recognized that his will to live and his luck at being found in time were part of it, they didn't seem like near enough of a reason for him to be lying alive up in the hospital. Hearing the story, we all knew there was more to it, that some fabulous bending of the usual laws of reality had occurred, and that the closest we were going to get to an explanation was the word miracle. The next summer at a party in Bell's Flats on the 4th of July, a big, slow deckhand named Copacetic Tim told this guy he never should have left the dock that night. He'd killed his own crew. And we all stood there and watched in embarrassed silence while the skipper put down his beer and beat Copacetic Tim until he limped off to his truck and went home. One more story. For a long time, they had a gold-painted king crab mounted on the wall between the fish tanks at Solly's, a memorial to the boom days in the 70s. A boat called the Shaman, run by Chuck Wells, had caught it in 1974 when she was brand new, and in the way of things, the golden king crab had become a kind of icon back there in the gloom. People would come in and point it out to each other, people who knew the boat or Chuck or who had been there then and saw it as a special thing, a token. One night, years later, a guy who had fished the big years on the Shaman was drinking in there with his friends. A combination of alcohol, nostalgia, and a slow night uptown persuaded him to lift the crab off the wall and take it home to Seattle as his own personal souvenir of the glory years. He jumped up on the bar, stepped across to the back counter and grabbed the crab, but the shell was old and brittle and crumbled into powder. He started kicking the tops off the bottles in the well drinks bin, and then we all watched in a kind of startled fascination, the glass flying off his boots, the bartender lady screaming up at him, and one golden king crab leg still hanging on the wall at a bad angle. In the morning, we saw him out in bright orange jail coveralls, picking up trash around the mall, doing community service, with a bored-looking cop watching him and two other guys from the front seat of his cruiser drinking coffee. Sometimes, lately, I take my kids in for burgers and Cokes on a Saturday afternoon. In this still small town, the place is full of familiar faces, and we wave and smile across the room. The kids bouncing around in the seats, getting up on their knees and looking at the old ladies in the next booth. The sunshine glints off the chrome beer tap handles on the bar up in front, and the smell of frying food and the rattle of dishes comes over from the kitchen and back. For the kids, what they see is it, the thing itself. But in daylight, sitting there, it is for me too. But sometimes I'll be thinking about someone that I used to know or some small event from the bad old days, and I'll get kind of quiet, and they joke with me about it, and they want to know, "Dad, what are you thinking about?" And what can I say? Should I tell them that when I close my eyes, I see people tumbling around on the dance floor in their extra tough boots with the fish tanks in the wall glowing like radar screens, with the calculations there on the table on a napkin of how many thousands of pounds of crab the room would hold if it were a live tank in the Bering Sea and it was 1975 again? And that I sometimes still see the faces from those years way back there in the shadows. Faces lit from below with those little red candles they used to have on the tables, like kids trying to scare each other with flashlights held under their chins, though by then we knew what scary really was, and it wasn't in there, you'd better believe it. I still hear their voices too, above and among the band and the crowd, the engine noise and the squeal of the hydraulics in sync between the low-frequency boom of a hull slamming around Cape Chiniac on a bad night and the high white noise of a Northeast 70 carrying it all away into the wind. How do I explain the fact that some of those dead guys behind my eyes, 22 years old forever, aren't quietly fading away and seem instead to be getting livelier as the years pass? Or the feeling that the past itself has become a living thing that can jump out from behind table 7 and make me spill my coffee. It gets complicated then when the living and the dead, all of them and each of us, are both victims and survivors, and it's hard to tell who the lucky ones really are, those who remember or those who are remembered. But then maybe the truest answer in the end is the simplest one, that there is no explanation, only another story. And somewhere down inside my heart, another boat slips past the breakwater into the channel, turns off its deck lights, and moves out past the swing buoy into the darkness of the open sea, carrying those ghosts away one at a time. Thank you.
All right.